So, welcome everyone. Jai Janendra. I'm Professor Christopher Jane Miller here in Zurich, and I'm joined by my colleagues. You're going to hear from Marie-Laine Gorsay later, who's going to introduce our speaker from University of Birmingham, as well as our other collaborator and co-organizer, Tine Wekemans at Ghent University. We're really, really excited to bring you this event on Jain Mantra. And before we begin, I just wanted to do a little housekeeping and tell you how the event will work. We do have a Q&A box that you can see down on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You're welcome to click on that Q&A box and enter in any questions that you have for our speakers throughout the event. You don't have to wait for them to finish speaking. And we really look forward to a productive conversation with you at the end of the event that will be presided over and emceed by Christoph Emmrich, who is here presiding for us. We also welcome you to share the recording after, where this is going to be a recorded webinar. And I'm going to now hand it over to my colleague, Marie-Laine Gorsay at University of Birmingham to introduce our topic and our panel. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Yeah, so after a wonderful kickoff of the season last month with reflections on Jain theories of aesthetics, both in philosophy and in architecture, our second topic, mantras and theories of karma, is a theme that I have very much at heart and whose understanding likewise requires a continued forth and back movement from philosophy to ritual practices. So to help us reflect about all that, this is my great pleasure to introduce today's three speakers. Very briefly, though, I will try to remain brief. First, we are delighted to have with us Christoph Emmrich from the University of Toronto in Canada, where he teaches in the Department for the Study of Religion. So how to introduce such a vast expertise as yours? That's a big question. Christoph is versed in Sanskrit and Pali, as well as Newar, Nepali, Burmese, and probably too Tamil. He's first a specialist of Nepalese and Burmese Buddhism, especially on the position of women, young women amongst the Newars. Now he's also a specialist on the historiography of Tamil Digambara Jain literature, along with temple ritual and education in Tamil Nadu. So a common thread that appears to me in these investigations is that he's always paying attention, a special attention to both the vast literary heritage of these traditions and to the social aspects of their living practices. So this is with this precious perspective that he has been familiar with the work or a long-term collaborator of today's two presenters. And so we are thrilled that you have kindly accepted our invitation to preside this session today. Thank you very much. And before I give you the floor to introduce the topic, let me also briefly introduce our two presenters of today. First, Hélène Goff from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, in the States. She teaches there in the religion department as well. Hélène research focuses on Jain ritual, on material culture, and on narratives. And in 2020, she published the already famous Making a Mantra that I always have nearby, where she shows in which sense tantric practices such as the ritual use of mantra or mandala can be viewed as logical extension of the ascetic path to liberation. So in her research, she takes this ethno-historical approach that combines the study of Gujarati, Hindi, Sanskrit, and Prakrit texts, as well as the study of material culture and fieldwork. So she's now working on a couple of projects related to Jaina astrology and Digambara festivals. So we are already looking forward to that. And today she will speak about the efficacy of mantra in Virasena's Davara. Now, since Jains have constantly used the language of karma theory to describe the effect of mantras, we are delighted to have our second presenters, Christy Willey, who needs no introduction, but still, Christy Willey is retired from the University of California at Berkeley, where she taught both Sanskrit, which is now rare, so I'm happy to mention that, Sanskrit and Indic religions in the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies. And she's notably the author of several landmark works in Jaina studies, starting with the Historical Dictionary of Jainism, that we have all used. Actually, I was part of a lecture today in which it was quoted, and for which you have just finished or are finishing a revised and expanded edition, I think, with Steve Vos and Anna Beigel. Also, she was the co-editor with John Court, Knut Jacobsen, and the regretted Paul Dundas of the Brill Encyclopedia of Jainism. And Christie's research is an absolute must for any scholar working on karma theory in Jainism, since notably her dissertation on Agatiya karma that I have here also, harmless karma, karmas like this as agents of embodiment in Jainism. So after this altogether two hasty introductions, my time is up. And Christoph, if I may, I now let you introduce today's topics so that it will be clearer why we thought that this should be one of our dialogue series. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marie-Hélène, for these very, very thoughtful words, very generous words, and thank you to everyone for having me here. Introducing the field of the two giants of the field, with the two giants being present, is a very humbling experience, I find, because who could introduce the field better than my two colleagues who are here with me? And introducing the field means that I will need to refer to important work done by other amazing colleagues who themselves, at least those of them who are still with us, would be way better suited to introduce the field they have worked in and contributed to than myself. Thirdly, and this is now getting close to sounding like the Pancha-Namaskara mantra, there are those respected colleagues in the audience whom I should be doing homage to, who I'm sure know much more than me about mantras and karma, both from the scholarly and from the practitioner side, and would do the job I'm going to do much better than I will. All the more I need to thank Marie-Hélène Goris and Christopher Miller and Tina Wenkemans and for asking me to speak to you today and for placing your trust in me. So please consider my comments as a layman's seva, trying to open some doors and to set the stage for a demonstration of scholarship by my two colleagues, Christy Wiley and Ellen Guff. That mantra is a big topic, and actually a 9.5 million euro worth topic at the very least in academia is shown by the Synergy Grant Mantra Project, beginning to be run by Finian Geraghty out of Oxford, together with Tübingen and Vienna. It shows what a big place mantra has in today's academia, and is seen to have so by more people than just us and the project leads, but by the granting authorities as well. In other words, mantra is big business and is really something we need to be dealing with. Just very briefly, I think mantra is something which emerged as in the current paradigm, maybe in the late 80s. Fritz Stahl's big book, Ritual and Mantras, Rules Without Meaning, together with André Padoud's Vach in 1989, the first, 1990, the second, and the second Padoud's work on Abhidhamma-gupta and Trika Shaivism in some way have kicked off this conversation, which is in some way still ongoing. We should also add, I think, from our own field, Caroline Humphrey and James Laidlaw, and their archetypal actions of ritual as another place in which engaging with Stahl and others, which have made this topic come very close to our own heart. I think a good introduction to that kind of first blossoming of the scene can be found in André Padoud's Mantras, What Are They?, in another really important volume edited by Harvey Alper, Understanding Mantras. I think that's an amazing place to start reading. That's 1991. So we're still in that first moment. Again, Mantras, What Are They? André Padoud in Alper, edited 1991. On other sides of the spectrum, Todd Lewis' book published in 2000. Popular text from Nepal is one which introduces the Pancharaksha literature. Fantastic first overview of this till then very understudied genre, which later now, and particularly with more recent work, has been, seen to enhance and to give a place for mantra in something which is more than just ritual. I'd also want to mention Chris Minkowski's little text, Why Should We Read the Mangala Verses? Again, one of these motivational texts which tells us why this is important, from 2008. That's in an edited volume by Walter Slaje, Shastraramba, on the opening of sacred texts. To conclude that first round, though we're already moving very close to the present, I think a very important discussion of mantra has also been kicked off by Vincent Elchinger, when we're looking at the Buddhist side, with his article Dharmakirti on mantras and their efficacy. That's 2018. So now we're edging close to where we are. Where I think he addresses something really important, which is important for the larger discussion we might be having, which is the concern in this text by the important 7th century Buddhist philosopher Dharmakirti about the rise of tantric practices. I mean, his concern, Dharmakirti's concern, right, and discourses regarding mantras in Buddhism. Discourses which consider mantra not to be conventional speech, as Dharmakirti would want to see it, uttered by humans, but as a beginningless speech uttered by transcendent Buddhas. So we find here a historical division within a tradition, a watershed, signaling transitions not dissimilar to what we find in the history of Jainism, some of which we'll be, I believe, discussing today. Moving to Jainism, I think the classic there to start the conversation is, let's start with a smaller classic, and I think that's Kalipada Mitra's Magic and Miracle in Jaina Literature. That's 1939, take note. I mean, so we're having a conversation in our field much earlier on this than what we find in the larger South Asian studies field. Again, not to say that we're in any way the avant-garde, but just to show how sensitive this issue is, and it's not just we're not just again reacting to what's been happening on the Shaiva or Buddhist side, right? We, not lowercase we. The first milestone, again, I would say after that initial spark would be Mohandas Bhagwandas Javeri's critical study of Jain Mantra Shastra. I mean, that's an amazing work. I mean, everyone who's not looked at it, I mean, needs to look at it, because it not just does he does a really world building, right? So it's an amazing encyclopedic work. 1944. Where he discusses vidyas and mantras in the agamas and in the commentaries, and introduces the 12th century Sri Bhairava Padmavati Kalpa by Malisena, which is an amazing text. So in some way, just to jump right into things, he serves it to us on a tray, and has been doing that basically since 1944. The next important text, I mean, for myself, working myself through this story of mantra and action and karma to a certain degree. Karma, I think, has remained a bit on the backdrop to the mantra in the ritual sphere, which I find why this event today is so important, as Marie-Hélène, you were pointing out. Yeah, the next text, 1974, I would say, that's Gustav Roth's Notes on Panchanamakara Parama Mangala, and where he basically does a fantastic job in going backwards, right? I mean, talking about the fleshed out mantra, and then going backwards and taking us back to the famous 1st century inscription, where we only have these two pieces on which feature the Arahats and the Siddhas, and he shows that basically historicizes the emergence of the mantra, of course, also in contrast to the traditional view that this is beginningless sound ringing through the loka forever. Then also, I mean, and then I think from there, 74, we should probably move on to, I mean, say Paul Dundas's important contribution, where he shows that unlike many mantras, the Panchanamakara mantra has an exoteric meaning and function, telling us self-reflexively that it destroys all evil with reference to karma and dangers. And then refers to, I mean, that's something then Paul Dundas does in some way, in an innovative way, referring to contemporary readings of this mantra, that it burns away all karma, that it leads to worldly success, and it positively affects the mind, that it's a form of comprehensive austerity, that it beats allopathic medicine, and on the technical side, that it subsumes all other mantras under it. He also Dundas points at the Bhaktamala Stotra, to Rishabha, 6th century, but in some way stops there, right? Doesn't really include that into his larger conversation, something which will happen much later with Ellen's work. What prepares the field, I think, for the next stage in the discussion of Jain mantra is Phyllis Granoff's Buddhaghosa's Penance and Siddhasena's Crime, and Buddhist remarks on Buddhist attitudes and Jain attitudes towards the language of religious texts. So we're getting into discussing what the language is like. We're not looking at things, we're looking at putting the mantra in a larger context of language speculation. And in some way, what she does establishes a new kind of way of dealing with mantra after Jhaveri, and in some way prepares the ground for Paul Dundas, who then is also interested in Jain attitudes towards the Jain language, towards Sanskrit language, I should say, in 1996. Phyllis Granoff's work from 91. And then we come, I think, to the really big foundational or seminal work by Dundas again, Becoming Gautama, Mantra and History in Shvetambara Jainism. I think that's really the big work, or small. It's a small work, but it's big in its effect, I would say. And that's in 1998, where he reintroduces the mantra question and establishes or reestablishes in some way the field of Jain mantra study, so to say. And, I quote for him, there does exist some sort of Jain mantra shastra, he says there very tentatively. Or does it? Because then he ends with the question, are we moving towards whether we're moving towards that kind of field? Where he actually pushes towards that kind of history and discusses the Suri mantra, as those who've read the text will know, and the power to become one with Gautama, the senior most of the 11 Ganadharas of Mahavira. And the focus in the article is on the Shvetambara tradition, however, and leaves the discussion of the Digambara side to others. And he also focuses on the most spectacular aspects and of the superpowers and the super actions which Jain mantras impart, not so much on the everyday use of mantras, again, something that will be picked up by later authors. And we should also say that what Paul Dundas does really importantly is that he contextualizes mantra and ritual action in South Asia, within a larger South Asian context, right? I mean, in some way, he really addresses the field out of which mantra studies have emerged, and says that yes, we have to keep in mind that we have the Shaiva and the Buddhist context around it, and there cannot be such a thing as an isolated study of the Jain mantra in separation from the two. However, we also he makes the case that we have to not understand this as a simple borrowing and as a kind of secondary taking over, but that we instead need to understand the emergence of mantra out of the Jain historical conditions and write a history which is also genuinely Jain, which takes seriously Jain rationales and Jain requirements. The supernatural part of the mantra discussion is then taken over. I mean, I would say it's then enhanced and continued by our speaker, Christy Wiley, with her article "Supernatural Powers and the Attainment in Jainism," which addresses similar questions in 2012. We shift to the everyday. I mean, the shift to the everyday in some way happens, I would say, with Whitney Kelting, generally addressing the question of what's the place of mantra in the everyday, but also then, of course, the question of how is mantra gendered. So in her Heroic Wives in 2009, the preoccupation is with protection, rather than moving away slightly from the superpower side to a more kind of immediate concern. Where Whitney Kelting discusses, as she calls them, religio-magical objects, the extension basically of the oral limits of the sonic power of the mantra, and in Whitney's own words, locking the mantra into objects, the spillover and proliferation of the mantra into the sphere of material culture, as through the Vaskep and the Prakshal as media, the gendered mantra also the power to hand on merit by getting your husbands involved. That then, I think, is carried over to a certain degree by Nalini's amazing contribution. The Jain tradition of protection and its means in 2018, where she takes another step back. She stays in the second part with the domestic, but then in the everyday. But then she tells us, well, wait, there's also this amazing monastic discussion of mantra and karma, and then also starts with this marvelous line that the Jains see the world around, quote, the world around them as full of danger. Somewhat over the top pronouncement maybe, but I think really effective in pushing the importance of what's been going on in the mantra world. So the idea of protection and guarding of the self used as a reflexive pronoun, guarding oneself, but also correcting Jacobi's and Schubring's translations, that it's not just guarding oneself, but also the self-guarding itself as the agent. She shows our parallels with Pali sources, but she also shows that there's a certain polemic within the monastic tradition against mantras and against certain practices, and the idea that monastics, particularly in the Angas, monastics should actually be taking care of these dangers by internal development and internal qualities rather than external means. A shift in which she identifies beautifully when she moves from the Angas to the Cheda Sutras and Bhashyas and Churnis, where that whole changes, where it gets much more, no, we need to take care of barefoot mendicants and snake bites. What she then beautifully also does is moves from that into Raksha Bandhana practices where mantras are really primary, but also then links us back very importantly to Pancharaksha, Buddhist Pancharaksha literature and the Jina Panjara Gatha, the Vasundhara Dharani, for example, and close correspondences with Buddhist literature. The final shift, and I'm moving towards the end of my comment, is, I would say, in our development, is a shift, an interest in the natural aspects of mantra and karma and materiality, which may come closest to some what we are discussing today. I'm thinking of Peter Flügel's work, Sacred Matter, Reflections on the Relationship of Karmic and Natural Causality in Jain Philosophy, which Journal of Indian Philosophy 2012, which I think addresses important issues beyond the doctrinal aspects we discussed earlier, and these domestic issues, but also Małgorzata Glinska, Materiality of Language in the Jain Philosophy, Introductory Matters 2016, also a really important issue to dealing with the materiality, which then takes us, of course, into questions of materiality of karma. So how exactly does karma and more generally doctrines of action come in here, and how can they enrich and help ground further understanding of mantra? Here I think, and Elaine, you already pointed that out, Christy Wiley's, your work, Christy, is so crucial, and your 2000 dissertation, Agatya Karmas, Ages of Embodiment in Jainism, the major work up to date and still unrivaled study of karma, next to Will Johnson's Harmless Souls from 1995, maybe. But finally, again, I cannot mention, but end without mentioning Ellen Guff's work, 2021, which has not only brought together all the various threads and more than I have been able to spin now, but has transformed our field by showing how mantra and its associated concepts of ritual action mediate and help us overcome the division which scholarship in Jainism has made between the monastic, mendicant, ascetic paradigm and the historically speaking tantric, be it superhuman or very domestic, from addressing worldly requirements, showing that it's exactly the carryover of the ascetic into the worldly and the attempt to make sense of Jainism's place in the history of South Asian religions that calls for mantra. And I will stop here and hand over to our two speakers today.
Thank you so much, Christoph. Yeah, so I guess, Hélène, yes, I'll let you take the floor now. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, that was amazing. Thank you, Marie-Hélène and Tine, for inviting Christy and I to speak. And thanks, Christoph. That really was like a mangala. You listed, you paid your obeisance to all these spiritually advanced souls, and you invoked all the people that I'm trying to build on here. And I think you'll see, I wanted to comment on every piece of scholarship you mentioned. I wanted to comment. So you'll see that this talk is trying to be in conversation with basically everyone you mentioned. I only have 20 minutes. So maybe the conversation will continue afterwards. But I'll share my screen here. Yeah, I'll say that my book came out of reading the footnote of Paul Dundas's chapter on becoming Gautama. He said little research has been done on modern practices of the Surya mantra, and that sort of became my life. So I owe him that little footnote that he had in become, and so much more, I should say, but okay. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Oh man, we practiced and I'm share screen. Here we go. PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay. You can see my screen, everyone?
All good.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to start my talk today with an anecdote about the power of the most famous Jain mantra, the Pancha Namaskara mantra. I'm sure everyone in the audience knows this mantra. That praises the five supreme beings of Jainism. So this story comes from the Shvetambara canonical text, the Gyata Dharma Katha, and it relates how one day on the outskirts of the city Rajgriha in Bihar, Mahavira had come to a park to preach, but nobody arrived to hear him teach. We're all afraid of a gardener called Arjun Mali. Now, Arjun Mali was a notorious murderer who, upon having seen his wife being assaulted by 6 men in a Yaksha temple on the outskirts of the city, became possessed by the Yaksha and then killed the 6 men and his wife. He then continued to kill anyone who would come into this territory outside of the city. One young man, however, Sudarshana, was committed to seeing Mahavira speak, so he persuaded his parents to let him leave the house and approach the park where Mahavira was staying. Before he could get to the park, however, a furious Arjun Mali stopped him in his tracks, determined to kill this young man who had trespassed onto his territory. Sudarshana didn't panic, however, and simply recited the Pancha Namaskara mantra. The power of these praises became like a shield around Sudarshana, and when Arjun Mali would try to strike him, his mace would bounce back. Eventually, Sudarshana was able to hear Mahavira preach, and the Yaksha left the body of Arjun Mali. Okay, so the Pancha Namaskara is ubiquitous in Jain ritual culture. Everyone who studies Jainism knows this mantra, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories like this that fill Jain scriptures. If you haven't heard this story, you've heard another one. And in reading these stories in my research on Jain mantras for the last 15 years or so, I've returned again and again to the question, have Jain philosophers attempted to account for these miracles? If so, how have they explained them? How do mantras work according to Jain ontology? Now, some modern Jain handbooks on mantra shastra and lectures on vague notions of sound vibrations affecting karmic particles suggest that the power of a mantra lies in the language itself, in the vocal pronunciations of particular phonemes. In the book on Mantra Song of the Soul from 1987 by the reformed Stanakvasi monk Acharya Sushil Kumar, he lists the specific effects of each syllable of the Devanagari alphabet. And we can see in the subtitle of his book, Science of Sound, it's very much the sound that has power here. Now, in the popular Digambara manual on Mantra Shastra, the Laghu Vidyanuvad by the monk Kuntusagara, this is always referenced when I interview modern Digambaras in India. He lists, so in this text, he lists the lakshana or qualities of each of the syllables of the Devanagari alphabet, developing a direct relationship between the syllables of the alphabet and specific positions, colors, genders, etc. Now, if these lists are true, then a minor change to a single syllable of the Pancha Namaskara or another Jain mantra could really affect the outcomes of the recitation of the mantra. And Jains have debated the proper pronunciation of this mantra for centuries. Years ago, one modern Digambara monk insisted to me that the retroflex na, rather than the dental na, be used for the namos of this mantra. Now, among Shvetambara, sometimes see the dental na at the outset of the mantra. And this version of the mantra is indeed found in, particularly in the Mahasutra from the 8th to 9th centuries, which contains the version of the mantra with this final Anushtup, the Eso Panchanamokaro, added, that is most popular today amongst Shvetambaras. Now, because the Mahanasihat Sutta was composed in Maharashtra and not the Shoraseni of the Shatkand Agama, the Digambara scripture that contains the earliest version of the nuz of the mantra are dental, not retroflex, as they are in the Shatkandagam, causing a slight difference between some contemporary Shvetambara and Digambara pronunciations of the first section of the mantra. And some people think this is very important. Now, Nalini Balbir has also examined the 13th century reference book of the Shvetambara mendicant lineage, the Anchalagacha, the Shatapadi, which confirms that the second to last word of the mantra should be hoi, not Havai. Now, hoi and Havai both mean is, but Anchalagach have found a number of Anchalagach monks found a number of manuscripts supporting the use of hoi, and take pains to emphasize that it should be pronounced hoi, not Havai. As Balbir explains, this reading is not a mere variant or mistake, but something deliberate and important. Now, years ago, when I asked a scholar of Jain philosophy at the University of Mumbai how, according to Jain philosophy, changing a particular syllable of the mantra, changing Havai to Hoi, or there are other changes I'm sure you've seen between different versions of the Namakar mantra. It's either, it can be Arihantanam or Arahantanam. Now, contemporary Jains really debate these different pronunciations. So I asked, why do you care? How could changing a particular syllable of the mantra affect the results of its recitation? So after I asked her that, she pointed me toward early Jain's discussions of the material nature of speech, especially Jain discussions of the or clusters of matter. Now, both speech and karma are varganas, she explained, so they affect each other. Now, it is true that Jain texts from the first half of the first millennium, both Digambara and Shvetambara, envision sound as a modification, a pariyai of matter, Pudgala. Now, language, Bhasha, has been classified, along with karma, as being caused by one of the types of varganas or clusters of matter. Now, various lists of varganas are found in Jain literature, and I think a lot more research needs to be done on them. But the fourth part of the Shatkandagama, this 2nd century CE Digambara canonical scripture that contains the earliest version of the Namakar mantra, lists 5 varganas, from which 23 further types are elaborated that you can see here. Now, according to the Shatkandagama, the karmically bound, when it goes certain types of action, yoga, it drives particles to cluster together to form these varganas, including sound matter and karma. As N. L. Katra explains in his discussion of various lists of varganas, he says, a change of one type of vargana into another type is possible. Unless organized into a meaningful form by a soul, these varganas remain in their natural state. It is only when a soul organizes and uses them that they discharge meaningful functions as described above. So according to the reasonings of these two scholars, sound as a cluster of matter could potentially influence the formation of karma, thus influencing one's wealth, health, etc., etc., etc. But the discussion of the varganas I have looked at do not flesh out how exactly a specific sound particle could affect a specific karmic particle. To my knowledge, no pre-modern Jain philosopher has theorized in a way in which speech as matter could influence karma as matter specifically. As Paul Dundas has noted, the material basis of speech was only infrequently invoked by Jains in specialized philosophical discourse, and no grand theory of spoken language or specifically Jain branch of the science of phonetics evolved from it. Now, this is not to say that Jains have not theorized how mantras work, however, and between the 9th and 11th centuries in South India, a number of Digambara theorists took up this topic. So today I want to look at some of these theorists to answer this question. If the meaning of a mantra remains consistent, does it matter if the sounds used to offer that meaning change? Does it matter if I pronounce na, or arihanta, or arahanta, or hoi, or havai, or to be more extreme, does it matter if I pronounce this mantra in English, or German, or Swahili? The philosopher at whom I want to look most closely is Virasena, the author of the Prakrit commentary on the Shatkandagama, the Dhavala, because he provides a lengthy commentary on the Panchanamaskara mantra, which opens the first chapter of the Shatkandagama as a Mangala or an auspicious invocation. But certainly by that time, the Panchanamaskara Mangala was understood to operate not just as a Mangala or an auspicious invocation at the start of the text, but also outside the context of the text. We have narrative accounts from much earlier than the 9th century in the Avashika literature, for example, that confirm that it was used as a mantra outside the reading of a text. So his commentary on this Mangala could be understood as developing a theory of mantra shastra. Now, Virasena is thought to have completed his commentary on the Shatkandagam in modern-day Karnataka in 816 during the 2nd year of the reign of the Rashtrakuta king, Amogavarsha. Now, Virasena also provides commentary on the 4th section of the Shatkandagama, which outlines the Varganas. So he was clearly knowledgeable about this idea, but he does not put these understandings of the materiality of sound to use in his commentary on the Panchanamaskara. Instead, he argues that the power of a mantra does not lie in the phonemes of the invocation, but in the special qualities of the composer and the meditator, you could say, not necessarily the reciter of a mantra, the person who meditates on the mantra. Virasena first explains that there are 2 types of mangalas. Do I have a... No. Virasena first explains that there are 2 types of mangalas. Those that have been composed for the text at hand and those that have not been composed for the text at hand. Now, contemporary Jains might immediately think that the Panchanamaskara Mangala should be seen as uncomposed, not composed, anibandha, as they often describe this mantra as eternal. And it's not just contemporary Jains. I mean, from the medieval period onward, we have a lot of literature about how the mantra is eternal. Virasena, however, insists that the Panchanamaskara Mandala is composed. He says that Pushparanta, the author of the Shatkandagama, this section of the Shatkandagama, composed this 5-fold praise himself, which means that our Sudarshana couldn't have actually been reciting it when Mahavira went to the park in Rajagriha. He interestingly undermines a lot of Jain literature by making this argument that Pushparanta composed the Namokar mantra. Okay, so then Virasena answers 6 primary questions about a Mangala. What's a Mangala? Who's the composer of a Mangala? Who's worthy of pronunciation of a Mangala? And what is the means of a Mangala? What are the types of Mangalas? And what are the effects of a Mangala? So to answer the first question, what's a Mangala? He quotes a few lines of a Sanskrit text from an unknown text. He quotes a few lines of Sanskrit from an unknown text that defines a Mangala as that which dissolves, I think I have it here, this first one, dissolves, destroys, slaughters, burns, kills, purifies, and crushes both mental and physical impurities. Mala, this term that is quite often used in Shaiva Siddhanta literature. But this exact same claim, word for word, is made in the Triloka Pragnapti in Prakrit, so it must have been popular. So he quotes a Sanskrit line that says this. It's also in Prakrit in the Triloka Pragnapti, so it must have been a popular line for a while. He then makes a few other claims about a Mangala you can see here, brings about happiness, its means by which one moves toward accomplishing one's tasks. Okay, and then to give us a sense of what or who could be praised in a Mangala, Virasena further identifies Mangala as jiva, or soul, that has undergone auspicious modifications. I would claim that this ensures that praises to non-Jains will not be considered as effective Mangalas. They have to praise a jiva that has undergone auspicious modifications. So to answer the second and third question, Virasena claims that a mendicant leader who has knowledge beyond the 14 areas of knowledge can compose mangalas, and souls that have the ability to achieve liberation can pronounce or engage with them. He then describes the means of the success of Mangala as whatever leads to the accomplishment of the 3 jewels of right faith, knowledge, and conduct. Virasena's answer to the question about the different types of Mangalas is more elaborate, as he employs a hermeneutical tool whereby a word is analyzed in terms of at least 4 different categories, Nikshepa. I think there needs to be a lot more research done on Nikshepa too. I'm over on Ekantavada. Someone should do a lot more. Bhatt has done really good work, but someone should write more on Nikshepa because I see it a lot. Okay, so what does he do? He analyzes the word Mangala with this Nikshepa in terms of, I won't get into the details of this, but you can read through it on the slides. He analyzes the word Mangala in terms of name, establishment, substance, place, time, and mode. In this analysis, he lists, among other things, particular dates of festivals and pilgrimage sites as auspicious times, Mangala Kala, and places, Mangala Kshetra, and he eventually defines the Panchanamaskara Mangala as a bhava Mangala, or a mode, bhava, of a substance that at the present moment has undergone an auspicious modification, paryaya. Then for the final question, the fruits of a Mangala. He says, the fruits of a Mangala are the happiness of a liberation and prosperity, suggesting that pronouncing or meditating on, he uses this word jhana. So, I mean, it's not just pronouncing the Mangala as well. Though I think this was in an oral context where this text would be recited, but we can talk more about this in the Q&A if you have any interest in that. Okay, right. So, but I'm still going to say, pronouncing the Panchanamaskara not only sheds karma and advances a person on the path to liberation, but also provides a person with worldly happiness. However, he emphasizes that pure meditation, Shukla Dhyana, is the means of liberation, and Namaskaras alone are not pure meditation. For Virasena, utterances power come not from the language in which they are composed, but from the special qualities of their composers, their reciters, and the souls they honor. Here, it's clear the composer of a successful Mangala be more than a knowledgeable Brahmin, he must be a Jain ascetic, and Mangalas are only effective if the reciter/meditator is capable of liberation, and the recitation/meditation encourages right faith, knowledge, and conduct according to Jain scriptures. Virasena therefore does not develop any specific claims about which material phoneme modifies which type of karma. As Dundas notes, the Jains' materialist approach to language no doubt reflected the early aspiration on the part of Jains to distance themselves from the sacralization of a supposedly eternal Sanskrit language that was at the center of Brahmin's social and ritual ideology, especially that of the Mimamsikas. But Virasena developed another way to critique the Mimamsikas without focusing on the material nature of sound. He focused on the creation of a mantra. While for Mimamsikas, the Sanskrit mantras of the Veda are powerful because they are uncreated and eternal, Virasena rejects this understanding, making a claim that would surprise many Jains today. Pushpadanta, the Panchanamaskara, has a human author, the Digambara monk Pushpadanta. For Virasena, mantras are powerful because they praise ideal Jain practitioners, and this devotion and respect destroys karma, thus creating real changes to one's circumstances. Now, in the decades to follow, other Digambaras would continue to critique this idea that the sound of the mantra itself determines its efficacy. Phyllis Granoff has shown how the 9th century Prabhachandra builds on the 7th century Buddhist thinker Dharmakirti to show that mantras work because they have been composed and recited by individuals of great power. When a special person devises a mantra with a given intention, thinking, may such and such result from this mantra, the desired result will follow. It does not matter what language the mantra is in. Eric Gurevich has also shown how the 10th century Anantavirya built on Dharmakirti to reject the Mimamsaka idea that the Veda is powerful because it is unauthored. So Anantavirya argues of the Mimamsakas, the claim is that a mantra is eternal, pervasive, independent of a person, and that it explicates its own meaning. And if that is the case, even a Shudra could be taught it anywhere because there is no difference between a Shudra and a Brahmin. Either that is the case or nobody can use a mantra. Here, Anantavirya shows the inconsistency between the Mimamsaka's claims that only Brahmins have the authority to pronounce the Veda and their claims that the language of the Veda is powerful in and of itself. However, these authors, like Virasena, sorry, I just lost my place. I'm leaving you on the edge of your seat, I'm sure. Okay. However, these authors, like Virasena, Jaina, they don't explain how exactly the mantras work. Maybe we get this a little bit from Amrita Chandra, though it's still not that satisfying to me. Okay, so there's this 11, this is also Phyllis Granoff discusses Amrita Chandra, this 11th century Digambara Amrita Chandra in his commentary on Kundukunda Samesara helps us out a little bit in this regard, in this question about how mantras work. For him, so he's commenting on Kundukunda Samesara, and he's especially interested in relaying the idea that the soul is only the instrumental cause of karmic change, that the soul doesn't directly interact with karma, sort of Kundukunda 101. So unsurprisingly here, mantras that praise spiritually advanced souls work for him not because they are material that modifies karma, but because meditating on them, not necessarily pronouncing them, modifies the soul. In discussing how a mantra could cure snake bites, attract women, or break chains, Amrita Chandra explains, the soul is only the agent. The soul is the only agent in the process whereby the soul itself is transformed into a certain modified state, just like the sadhaka. And taking that as an instrumental cause, matter in turn transforms itself into karma. For the sadhaka, transforming himself into a state of meditation is the agent of that meditative state. That meditative state is merely the instrumental cause in the next step, being conducive to the accomplishment of all ritual aims. With it as the instrumental cause, and without the sadhaka functioning as an agent, the creeping poisons of snake bites are stopped by themselves, women are captivated of their own accord, shackles break by themselves. Okay, so after this quick run through of these Digambara thinkers, medieval Digambara thinkers, I want to return to this question I asked at the outset of this talk. If the meaning of a mantra remains consistent, does it matter if the sounds used to offer that meaning change? Or does it matter the language in which a mantra is recited? I think it should be obvious by this talk that the answer, according to these Digambara thinkers, is no. It doesn't matter if you pronounce Hawaii or Hoi. They both mean the same thing, and they're both found in Jain scriptures, so they're both composed by Jain acharyas. And if a learned Jain acharya were to translate the Pancha Namaskara into Swahili today, or to compose another mantra that praises spiritually advanced souls that have undergone an auspicious modification, if it were to be recited or meditated upon by a soul who can achieve liberation, then it seems to me that these Digambaras would deem it to be effective. So those are my ideas. Those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellen. Amazing run through. Shall we proceed right away to Christy, to your talk? Yes, please go ahead, Christy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Christoph, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me to participate in this. And thank you, Christoph, for all of the information that you've given us about the field of mantras. It was a very, very nice tour de force. And I also want to add that Christoph is also one of the co-authors on the revised historical dictionary. So he's bringing a very nice Tamil perspective to this. So, and we're busy in the final stages of getting this thing out to people so that they can actually use it. So that's wonderful, wonderful news, I think, on all of our parts. And so I want to basically say that this is sort of the second part of the presentation that Ellen gave, a continuation of it. And I wanted to pick up, it's good because I don't have to give the background to what I am talking about. And so you're now familiar with the concept of mangalas, auspicious utterances, and so forth. I will switch back and forth with my use of the term mantra and mangala because in some contexts the word mantra simply doesn't work. And also a word of caution, I will be putting up a PowerPoint in a few minutes, but don't get overly stressed out about all the technical terms that might be on it. I put them up for reference so people can read them as I'm going through my paper and refer to them. But there's no reason you don't have to know the technical terms in order to hopefully understand the concepts that I'm dealing with. And the area that I'm going to focus on, the two areas that I will pick up that Ellen mentioned very briefly, are the concepts of two important concepts that he makes, the concepts of bhavya souls, and we'll talk about what that means exactly, and also the concept of this concept of the Shukla Dhyanas, the pure meditative states. So that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm also going to focus my attention on specifically what Virasena is saying in his commentary about the function of the Namaskara Mangala at the in this text itself, not elsewhere, not other places in the world, but focusing on it in this text, and explain or hopefully explained as best I can in terms of how this would translate into what his ideas, how they would translate into karma theory. And I'm not going to talk about the efficacy of sound and so forth. I agree with Ellen that I've seen no commentary to this effect in certainly not in his work. But then, it's a large work. I suppose it could appear somewhere, but I have not yet come across it. So anyway, okay. So I would like to focus my discussion on the part of the commentary, as I said, where Virasena engages with an imagined objector who raises questions about auspicious utterances or words, mangalas, destroying karma. In specific, the Namaskara mantra, which is found at the beginning of chapter 1 of Shatkanda Agama. Now, it's going to be the portion where he has an objector, and he's going to interact with this. I like to imagine that the objector in this case must have been one of his students who was sitting there going, why do I have to do this? Anyway, the objector asks, if the text should be considered an auspicious utterance. If not, then it is not scripture or sutra, because as something inauspicious, engaging with it would cause inauspicious karmas to bind with the soul. If it is mangala, then the namaskara is useless, because scripture alone would achieve one's goals. Virasena replies that both are necessary, because scripture and namaskara destroy inauspicious karmas in different ways. Here, in this context, the namaskara prevents obstacles in reading, and it's the sutra that destroys inauspicious karma and that eventually is the cause of all destruction. Now, Virasena continues with a comment elsewhere. It says, without understanding the subjects of the scripture, praising Jain holy beings does not destroy karma. Karma attaches to one's soul with every action, so pure meditation or Shukla Dhyana is the means of destruction of all karmas. Now, how to make sense of this? Before beginning our discussion, I want to bring in two other statements. The objector notes that if a mangala destroys karmas that hinder the study of scripture, then the recitation at the time of death would be useless. Virasena responds that there is no rule declaring that mangala destroys only karmas that hinder the study of scripture. And he also says that only souls that have bhavyatva, a quality that exists in some souls rendering them capable of liberation, can pronounce or engage with the mantra. So these statements then define it as parameters or operations, in other words, the range in which this mangala operates. The lower limit of its operation, or minimum requirement, is if a soul is not bhavya, then reciting or listening to mantra is ineffectual. And the upper limit is defined by stages in which karmic processes operate that are activated by pure meditation. Now, given these parameters, here is an example of how things might work. If one hears the recitation of the namaskara, this can act as an externally sufficient cause or nimitta for attaining a proper view of reality or samyaktva, which is the first step on the path to liberation, just like the sight of a jinnah image or encountering a muni, and all sorts of other things as well. The only restriction are that the soul must have the quality of bhavyatva, it must be embodied as a five-sensed rational being, and it must encounter an efficient cause that will trigger this. So all four states of existence and all genders are possible for attaining samyaktva. When this quality is awakened, the soul's energy, or virya, is directed away from delusion towards proper insight and liberation. So now let's talk about karmic bondage. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but just in case. So action produces vibrations in the energy or virya quality of the soul, which attracts a certain number of molecules pradeshas, which of an extremely subtle form of matter, which has the potential to be transformed into different varieties of karma. But it's passions or kashayas that cause the bondage of this matter to the soul, during which it is transformed into different varieties of prakritis, each of which produces a specific effect. Each is given a specific duration or sthiti, how long it will remain bound with the soul, and intensity or anubhaga, strength of its effect. If nothing intervenes, it remains bound with the soul in a period of quiescence before coming to rise and producing its effect in a given degree of intensity and then falling away from the soul. Now that's what happens if nothing intervenes. But karma is very dynamic, and so there's all sorts of modifications that can take place to this previously bound karma. Okay, Chris, slide 1. There we are. So we're going to be talking, there's a number of them. We're going to be talking about 3 of them today. And one of them is suppression of karmic matter, or upashama. The other is destruction of karmic matter, meaning kshaya. And when you destroy karmic matter, 2 things happen. One is the destruction of intensity, in other words, reducing the intensity to 0, or anubhaga, and destruction of duration, or sthiti, in other words, increasing the length of time that it's going to sit in quiescence to operate to 0. It's going to immediately come into rise, fall away from the soul, but produce no effect whatsoever. So in that way, the mechanics of destroying karma are understood. So kshayopashama is a combination of these 2, which is described as the process has been described as some portion is destroyed, some is suppressed or held in abeyance, while some is in rise. So in other words, it's sort of it partially modifies the karma. And we'll talk a little bit about how this operates next. Okay, so Chris, next slide. Okay, so here's the karmas that we're going to be working with. We're going to be working with the destructive karmas only, the gatya karmas. They're all considered inauspicious or negative. And there's 4 of them. You will see them here on the screen. The first 2 are going to obscure those qualities of the soul with respect to perception and knowledge. Mohaniya karma, which is the main problem here, is the cause of delusion. It affects the bliss quality of the soul, actually. And it has 2 types of karma that cause 2 different things. One obstructs right belief, which is what we will focus on. The other obstructs right conduct, which also goes with right belief. So the 2 work together. So you really, the one that eventually you're going to be working on, the ultimate one, is to destroy the karma that obstructs right conduct. And this is attraction or aversion to objects in the form of anger, pride, deceitfulness, and greed. And of course, the other one, which we just mentioned, is antaraya, which hinders the energy quality of the soul. And there's 5 of them. The one that we're going to be talking about impedes willpower. So each of these karmas, these are the 4 main varieties. We're not going to be discussing the 4 main varieties of the agatya karmas, the karmas that cause embodiment, feelings of pleasure and pain, and so forth. Okay, so what are we going to be working with? We're going to be working with basically with Mohaniya karmas, and we're going to be working with Virya karmas. So in attaining samyaktva, this is what I'm going to talk about at this point. Okay, so next slide. Where was I at? So when a soul attains samyaktva, this is what is going to happen. Each of these processes lasts for a period of time, which often is found in Jain texts, which is called an antar muhurta, which means any period of time that's less than 48 minutes. So with the first process of energy, the soul becomes acutely aware of intense passions, or kashayas, that it has experienced from beginningless time and has a strong impulse to transcend them. Now, by means of the second, there is a reduction in the intensity and duration of some of these, of some portion of the previously bound inauspicious varieties of karma, not just darshana mohaniya karma. I want to emphasize that. And the premature fruition of some of these karmas. So it's going to bring them to fruition earlier than what it would have been otherwise. Now, with the third, this continues, but towards the end of this time, the darshana mohaniya karma that is about to come to fruition is suppressed totally. So it's upashama, it's not going to come into rise at all. The soul, unaffected by this deluding karma, now has faith in the teachings of the Jina. So it's the first time it's going to experience or understand or have a association with a proper view of reality, and thereby attaining the fourth stage of spiritual purity, or gunasthana. And we'll go to that in a minute. Because this arises from the suppression of karma, it is called abhashamika samyaktva. Now, during this time, through this same process of energy, the anivritti karana, this is the curious part, the interesting part, at least to me anyway. So the soul is going to take some of the darshana mohaniya karma that has been previously bound, and that is what you see there is the mityatva karma. It's the only karma that is actually bound by the soul. So it's going to take and it's going to transform that into two less virulent varieties called samyak mityatva, or mishra, which is the second. And we're not going to really talk about that. It's a transitional state that either you're there for momentarily, then you either revert or you are going to stay where you're at. Okay, so this produces a mixed or wavering belief, meaning that you're indifferent to spiritual instruction, and samyaktva karma, which produces right belief. Now, at the end of this time, which can last for 45 minutes, one of these will come to fruition and produce its effects. So, Chris, next slide. Now, we're going to switch. The next thing that happens is dependent upon the intensity of the degree of passions that the soul is experiencing when this period of time ends. So, if the soul is still experiencing the most intense degree of passions, which is called the ananta anubandhi passions, it will be accompanied by the operation of mityatva karma, and it will fall back to the first gunasthana. However, and this is important, its delusion will be less because the intensity of this karma was reduced during this process. If it is experiencing less intense degrees of passion, the samyaktva karma comes to fruition and the soul retains a proper view of reality and experiences what is called kshayopashamika samyaktva, which is defined as correct faith in a preliminary degree. There's different definitions of exactly what this is, but it's basically a pure understanding of, or good understanding of reality. But the problem with it is that as long as it's in existence, these karmas are all still in existence, so it's possible for the soul to revert at any time. So, with that said, the next important step in this is once a soul has attained a proper view of reality, it must at some point in time attain liberation. So there's no doubt about that whatsoever. Eventually, the soul will have enough energy to destroy all reality deluding or darshana mohaniya karma, thereby realizing destructive right belief, which is called kshaika samyaktva. And this is done in the 7th and 8th gunasthanas when the soul begins to ascend what are called the ladders, the shrenis, in this case, the ladder of destruction. Chris, next slide. Okay, we're up to the shrenis now. So this is the other important part, or interesting thing, at least to me, when one deals with karma theories. So in the Shrenis, when you're talking in the 7th to the 14th, or higher gunastanas, and this is the level above when you go back, the levels of them from proper view of reality, samyaktva. The next level is accepting the lay vows. The next level is accepting. That's the 5th. The lay vows are the mendicant vows are the 6th. Right. So 5th, 6th, and now we've proceeded up. Thank you, to the 7th. Gunasthana. 7th is a temporary state also, whereby the soul is wavering between perfectly being a perfect observance of one's mendicant vows and carelessness in observing one's mendicant vows. So it's sort of a very temporary state. You're there for this antarmuhurta time, and then you're going to fall back again. So it's sort of a transitional state between the, as you're progressing along, assuming that you're dealing with mendicants, the 6th gunasthana and the gunasthanas above that. Now, these are only going to, the only thing that is going to destroy or deal with either suppress or destroy karma in these higher gunasthanas are the 4 pure meditations. So basically what Virasena is saying is that you can progress as far as the 6th gunasthana, the mendicant vows, but you cannot progress along the path of purification without engaging in these 4 pure meditations, or shukla dhyana. Now, this is the interesting part. Do you see the terms that I have in blue there? Now, on the ladder, these are the same exact processes of energy that we just talked about in the case of attaining samyaktva. Now, on the ladder of destruction, these same 3 processes of energy are employed, but here they are more powerful, and they can only be activated by engaging in the first 2 types of pure meditation. So according to Virasena, this is the limit of Mangala. Mangala can cause the attainment of samyaktva, thereby setting into motion the guaranteed trajectory of the soul towards liberation. So in this sense, it will result in the destruction of all karma, but it cannot activate the processes of energy through which this will take place. Now, another very quick aside is that what happens next in the 8th gunasthana, you're going to have the destruction of all darshana mohaniya karma. There you're going to have kshayika samyaktva. Along with this, of course, you're going to have the destruction of all conduct, 4th degree, the highest intensity of conduct diluting karma. So once you're in the 8th gunasthana, what happens next depends upon whether you have bound karma that determines lifespan and state of existence in the next life, i.e. Ayu karma. So if you've already bound Ayu karma, you cannot proceed beyond this point. You're going to fall back to wherever you were before the 6th gunasthana. Presumably we're talking about monks here, mendicants here. And so you're going to fall back then. But the good part about this is once you have gotten this far, according to the text, you're guaranteed within 4 births of attaining liberation or moksha. So if not, then the soul is going to proceed along with engaging in these forms of shukla dhyana, the first 2, is going to progress up the ladder of destruction to the state of the Sayoga Kevalan, where, in other words, omniscient with activity, will remain there until the lifespan karma is about to be exhausted, whereby it will engage in the last 2, the final 2 shukla dhyanas, whereby it will bring, the soul will bring to an end the activities of the body, speech, and mind. With that, the rest of the karma will be exhausted and the soul will attain liberation. Okay, we haven't gotten that far yet, of course, but so let's return to where we were at. So let's go back to Virasena's statement. Chris, the next slide. Okay. He's going to say, mantra prevents obstacles in reading, and the sutra destroys inauspicious karmas and eventually destroys all karmas. Next slide. All right, so what is Virasena talking about when he's talking about the fact that here it's going to be the sutra that's going to be doing the destruction, and it's going to be the mangala that is going to be removing obstructions to the understanding of sutra. So it's going to do these same similar types of operations, except not attaining some, well, you could attain samyakta, but you also could just be destroying karma anyway. So what the mangala or mantra is going to do here is it's going to activate, it's going to work on the virya antaraya karma, it's going to activate that, but then it's going to suppress to a greater degree the darshana mohaniya karmas, the ones that are associated with perception and specifically knowledge and working through words, writing, gestures, this type of thing. So it's going to suppress or do the kshayopashama of these karmas that are in blue, while at this time then it's going to be the sutra, the auspicious sutra, that is going to be operating on the destruction in the mohaniya karmas. At least that's my best guess as to what he is saying. So what is the connection here? And why is sutra necessary? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So the next slide of what is interesting about this is that what he brings up are all forms of internal austerity. So respect for mendicants is the same, or Vinaya is considered to be praising in the Namaskara mantra is certainly going to be within the category of respect for mantra. Studying the scriptures is what his Virasena's students, of course, are engaged in at this point. So that would be svadhyaya. But in order to get to the four states of pure meditation, one needs to have a proper understanding of the scriptures, because in engaging in these meditations, it's impossible to do without the knowledge of these scriptures, because they deal with the knowledge that is in here. So what I want to do in sort of concluding is to say that, let's see, where am I at too? Sorry, I lost track of thought. Okay, so now I want to emphasize that what I have discussed relates to what Virasena has said about this specific auspicious utterance, in this specific case, which should not be overgeneralized. This is my best guess as to what Virasena is talking about. I would like to close with what Professor Jaini has written in the Jaina Path of Purification regarding Shukla Dhyana itself. And I'll quote, "These two dhyanas through which these attainments are made possible involve discursive concentration upon the nature of the tattvas or existence as set forth in the Jain scriptures. The correlation between these two types of Shukla Dhyana and the spiritual processes of the 6th, 8th, 9th, and 10th gunasthanas, especially regarding the precise mechanism whereby the passions are negated, is not fully explained in the Jain texts." Now here we are. This is not unusual. It is often the case, and we are faced with the same problem here. We know from karma theory the mechanics, in other words, the mechanics of binding in some of these operations. That is no mystery. But we do not know precisely how they relate to mangala, auspicious utterances, in the form of mantra and sutra, and how they relate to Shukla Dhyana. So in concluding, that's the end of it, but I will make one comment about this idea of tapas. Oftentimes, it's understood to produce bodily heat, and one of the expressions that's always used is karma is burned or incinerated or this type of thing. So this is certainly how it's visualized. But again, where you have this sort of disconnect, I've never seen any talk in the text about karma actually operating in this way. In other words, if it actually was doing that, I would think there would need to be some discussion about the Taijasa body, the body which is the one that is going to produce heat in the body. And I've never seen a discussion that this is involved in any way in these sorts of processes. So I will leave my comments here, and when we can go to the question and answer session. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christy. Amazing talk. Yes, I guess so much to talk about. I have a couple of things on my mind, but I'd like to open the floor to everyone else to throw in their comments, questions. Right now, I don't see anything in the Q&A. Am I looking in the wrong place? I guess not. So I encourage you, following Chris's encouragement, to send in your questions, and I'll be happy to read them out.
There was one question I saw from Samatva Pragya in the Q&A that just popped in. I don't know if you saw that one, Christoph, on your side. If you click.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I've got it now. Yes, thank you. That's right. Samatva Pragya. What is Ayu karma? Ayu, capital I, capital U, karma.
Thank you. Yeah, so Ayu karma is the karma that determines, it's one of the non-destructive or agatya karmas. The Ayu karma is the karma that determines lifespan, how long your life will be in the next existence. It also determines one of the four gatis or states of existence into which you will be born, as a hell being, heavenly being, human being, or one of the animals. And it's bound just, unlike the other karmas, it's bound just once in each life, and its first opportunity for binding is when 2/3 of your life have been exhausted. There's a possibility, however, that it's not bound until just prior to the time of death. Always, unless you're going to attain liberation, it will always be bound prior to that, which of course circles back as to why it's important to have a proper state of mind and to remain in samayika, or these various other states around the time of death, because if you bind Ayu karma then, and you never know whether you have or not, then this is going to set your next life on a trajectory. So, okay.
Next question we have here. Thank you, Christy. Next question. Can you please explain that? How did you relate Namaskar Mahamantra to Svadhyaya Tapa?
Okay. So how did I relate the Namaskara Manojis to Svadhyaya or tapas? Okay, so I wasn't relating the Namaskara mantra to it. I was relating the sutra to it. Sorry. So I was relating the in the case that Virasena is addressing at the beginning of the Shatkanda Agama. It's going to be the sutra that's going to be doing the destruction. So it's the sutra that's the Svadhyaya. And it's the Namaskara that is going to be the praise of mendicants. So I didn't relate it. I related sutra to it.
Thank you, Chrissy.
Mm-hmm. Sorry about the confusion.
Thank you. No, thanks for clarifying. I had a thought regarding a couple of things you were saying, Ellen. If I may throw that in at this point, as we don't have other questions, which is, I mean, one big topic, of course, in ritual regarding mantras in this case is efficacy. The other, which came to my mind, is authorization. So I was wondering how that may be connected, and what you if you could say something about who is. One is whose recitation is actually has an effect, but who's actually authorized to recite mantras? I'm thinking of something like as basic as the Panchanamaskara mantra. How far does that authorization, which is maybe the most exoteric form, how far does that authorization extend? Can non-Jains, for example, recite a mantra, or what ethical and ritual preconditions are there for for whoever be able to say, yes, you're good. Keep going.
Yeah, that's a great question, because when we look at Virasena, he seems to suggest that mantras can be effective if your soul is bhavya, if you are, and I think Chris, you can speak more to this. I know Padmanabh Jain has written on this, on how you can determine whether or not your soul is capable or incapable of liberation. And does that undermine Jain philosophy to suggest that an inherent quality of the soul is being capable or incapable of liberation? So that means that any bhavya soul who pronounces this mantra can have the effects of the mantra. But when we read Jain literature, there are certain mantras that cannot be pronounced by certain people. So the Panchanamaskara is supposed to be the mantra that everyone can recite. But then we have these mantras like the Vardhamana Vidya and the Suri mantra that can only be pronounced by Suri mantra can only be pronounced by Shvetambara mendicants of the highest rank, acharyas, and then Vardhamana Vidya is for upadhyayas. So yeah, I think Virasena doesn't account for that at all. And perhaps there's a problem then when I sort of conflate Mangala and mantra. When I say, well, he's talking about the Panchanamaskara Mangala, and he mentions its recitation at the time of death. So he knows that it's being used outside of the scripture. So that then I just make the leap to, okay, so the commentary on mantras, because I think I'm sort of desperate for a Jain commentary on mantras, because we have these, I think we'll find more, people are finding more commentaries on actual mantras of the word, but we don't have a lot. I haven't found a lot in Jainism. So maybe I think highlighting a problem with my conflation of Mangala and mantra, because the Suri mantra is Mangala, so then maybe I should be able to pronounce it, and the effects will be achieved by me. But certainly doctrinally, in terms of ritual culture, that would not be allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I add something also, Ellen? You also mentioned in your book that if in order for Mangala mantra to be effective, that the person has to have the right bhava, the right mental sentiment to engage with it. It doesn't say you can't engage with it, but it also says it's not going to be effective unless the person that is engaging with it has the right bhava.
Right. You're totally right. Yes. So it can't just be anyone, any Bhavya Jeev reciting it. Yeah, Bhavya Jeev with the right
Right.
bhava.
Yeah. Thank you. Great thoughts. We have two more comments. One by or questions. One by Shobha Vartaman. There is a lot of conversations on mantra chanting and increase in gamma waves and quietening of limbic system. In the intonation, then the intonation is important. Do you think that this explains why it should be na and not na?
Yeah, that's exactly why I brought that up. There's a lot of these studies that are coming out. I've sat through sort of lectures on the power of the Bhakti Stotra and things like this, and it always comes back to this studies of water and people reciting. And Tina, I think you've written on this on Bhakti Stotra, and how recitations affect water in this way. So that means it affects karma in this way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These medieval Digambara thinkers aren't speaking in that way. So they don't seem to care. I have not found that. They don't seem to care if it's na or na. And that's his place. Virasena's commenting on the Panchanamaskara mantra, clearly a really important recitation by that point in the early 9th century. He could have said it needs to be pronounced this way, and Prakrit is really important. This particular form of Prakrit is very important to us, but he didn't bring any of that up in this commentary, on the earliest commentary and the most substantial commentary on the Panchanamaskara mantra. So, but I think, yeah, in modern discourse, you hit that. That's certainly the Digambara monk who said, well, I've also had monks that say I shouldn't even pronounce it because I can't pronounce it properly because I'm American, which is true. I can't pronounce it properly. But what is that? What does that mean? But I would say that Virasena goes against all these modern claims.
I'm also thinking of regional pronunciations, right? I mean, in Tamil Nadu, you don't pronounce the aspirates, for example, right? And the chers get serified. So how does that cross-regional work cross-regionally? Right?
Right. And very quickly after Sena, we have all sorts of versions of the Namaskar mantra in Sanskrit, and they weren't really concerned about that.
Yeah. We have one more question, two more actually. Jay Soni, can one somehow relate the use of mantras to the general Indian attitude to mantras? For example, as part of Svadhyaya. Svadhyaya? Svadhyaya. Svadhyaya.
Christy, do you want to speak to that?
No. I'm not an expert on mantras. That's of course the problem. So I don't think I could relate. I don't know enough about mantras to be able to relate that to Svadhyaya.
Yeah,
I'm
I think
sorry.
what you were saying is that in terms of different types of tapas in Jain scriptures, mantra recitation wouldn't be understood as Swadhyaya. It would be understood as Vinaya or reverence to monks. And that would be how it could be understood as a kind of tapas.
Yeah, so I don't want to, I don't know that I feel qualified to comment on this because I don't know the range of what is understood to be Svadhyaya. So unless I know the range of what's understood to be Svadhyaya, then I think what I say would be wrong. So it's possible that it could be understood. I'm talking about in this context, the context I was talking about. He's not talking about it being a form of Svadhyaya. I don't see, in just thinking about it off the top of my head, I don't see why it couldn't be considered Svadhyaya. One could have that be, depending on what one did with it, for example. So I think depending on how narrow, expansive you understand the term Svadhyaya would depend upon the answer to that question. But I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think Virasena was interpreting it that way. He was interpreting
I think you made a great point that he was explicitly making a distinction between
Yeah.
Mangala and then Swadhyaya.
I think he was. I mean, I think because he was sitting there with students who were going to be interacting with the text, and so he's wanting to say, you have to interact with this text. That's Svadhyaya, and in this case, Mangala is. But he says they operate differently in different. I think he understands them operating differently in different contexts. So I don't think he would preclude that, but I don't think he's talking about that in this instance.
Yeah, and then later we have discussions of mantra as dhyana, so another form of tapas. We have these lists of the different 12 types of tapas in
Right.
Jainism. So understanding, mantra recitation as dhyana, I think, is important in Jain text, and then maybe as Vinaya as well, but maybe not Swadhyaya, if we want to put it in one of these categories of tapas. Hopefully that answers the question.
We've reached a time limit. I don't know, do we have time for one last question or do we need to wrap up?
I think maybe we should wrap up soon. Maybe you can just read the one last comment, I think, from Mehul. But
Yes,
then
that's
it's
what I think.
a lot of participants who already has questions. So yes, maybe one final one if you're okay.
Good. Okay, Mehul Sangrajka. The concept of Bhavya Jiva is not universally accepted as it has some difficulties. First, many scriptural references to all souls being equal. Pardon me. Two, without an universal creator God who decides. And third, there are no known properties within a soul that indicate the state. Would you agree?
Yeah, that it is a problem. It's problematic. Yes, I would absolutely agree that it is a controversial or problematic conception. It does, however, exist. I mean, some people certainly do ascribe to this. Professor Jaini has, of course, written a very good article on all of the problems associated with this and the problematic nature of this. So, yes.
Good. Well, thank you so much. Let me thank you at this point for two of you, and thank our people in the audience for their questions and comments. And back to you, Marie-Hélène, Christoph.
Yes, thank you to our speakers and to our presider, Christoph. Christy, and to Ellen for the wonderful participation. What a wonderful event. I just wanted to briefly turn our attention toward the calendar. So on December 2nd, we'll be having our next event in the Dialogue Speaker Series, Alternative Forms of Priesthood and Monkhood in Jainism. You can register for that by going to dialogues.arihantainstitute.org, and you'll be able to find it in the events section on our website as well. I also want to let you know that this event has been recorded. We will put it together and get it up on the website. So if anybody missed it or wants to go back and listen again, you're most welcome to do that. And we really thank all of you, all the attendees, for staying and for participating so wholeheartedly here in the discussion. And thank you once again to Christoph, to Ellen, and to Christy, and then, of course, to my collaborators, Marie-Laine Gorse and Tine Wekemans. We'll see you again soon. Jai Jinendra, have a nice day, have a nice evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.